I never imagined my lowest moment would become my mother's favorite story to tell. She didn't comfort me. She didn't protect me. She performed my failure like entertainment. The first time I heard her laughing about it, I thought I was mishearing. The second time, I realized it was intentional. By the third time, I understood exactly what kind of narcissistic parent I was dealing with. It started after I failed. Not something dramatic like a crime or a scandal, just life. A job I worked years for that didn't work out. A relationship that collapsed quietly. Bills piling up faster than hope. I was exhausted, ashamed, barely holding myself together. And my own mother saw it as material. She told relatives, she told her friends, she exaggerated details, she added punchlines. Every version of the story made me smaller. At family dinners, she would sigh loudly and say things like, "Well, some people just aren't built to succeed." People laughed uncomfortably. No one defended me. That was my first taste of humiliation inside my own home. This wasn't a single cruel comment. It became a pattern. She would bring up my failure whenever she wanted attention, whenever the conversation drifted away from her, whenever she needed to feel superior. This wasn't concern. This wasn't tough love. This was family drama engineered for applause. And the worst part? I still kept trying to earn her approval. I told myself she didn't mean it. I told myself she was just worried. I told myself this is just how she is. That's what growing up with a narcissistic parent teaches you, to doubt your own pain before you ever question their behavior. But something changed the night she invited guests over. She didn't warn me, she didn't ask permission. She brought up my failure mid-conversation, smiling like she was telling a funny anecdote. I felt my face burn. My hands shook. I wanted the floor to swallow me. And when I finally looked at her, really looked, I saw satisfaction in her eyes. That was the moment I stopped feeling like her daughter and started feeling like her prop. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry in front of anyone. I didn't make a scene. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat in silence. That silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something she never saw coming. Because when humiliation becomes routine, when your pain becomes someone else's entertainment, you eventually stop reacting. And when you stop reacting, you start planning. This story isn't about screaming matches or explosive confrontations. It's about patience. It's about clarity. And it's about the kind of revenge that doesn't look like revenge at all until it's far too late to undo. Growing up, I didn't know my childhood was unusual. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. Clean house, shared meals, holiday photos with forced smiles. But inside our home, everything revolved around my mother. Her mood decided the temperature of every room. Her approval was currency. Her disappointment felt like a sentence. She was charming in public, helpful, funny, the kind of woman people praised as a strong mother. At home, she was different. She compared constantly. If I succeeded, it was because of her. If I failed, it was because I was weak, lazy, or ungrateful. That's what living with a narcissistic parent does. They rewrite reality until you no longer trust your own version of events. When I was younger, she would say things like, "I'm just being honest," or "The world won't be kind to you, so I won't be either." I believed her, so I grew up chasing perfection. Good grades, responsible choices, always trying to prove I wasn't a disappointment. But love was conditional. When I did well, she bragged. When I struggled, she withdrew, or worse, mocked. That pattern followed me into adulthood. I chose a career I thought she would impress. I stayed in relationships longer than I should have because quitting felt like failure. I tied my self-worth to outcomes instead of effort. And when everything collapsed at once, the job, the relationship, my financial stability, I felt like I had confirmed her worst opinion of me. That's when the humiliation intensified. She didn't scream, she didn't explode, she smiled. She framed my struggle as a life lesson for others. She told people, "This is what happens when you don't listen to your mother." Every retelling stripped away context. Every laugh from her audience made me smaller. The family drama wasn't loud, it was subtle, insidious. Side comments, knowing looks, little jokes disguised as concern. I started dreading family gatherings. I spoke less, I apologized more. And yet, a part of me still hoped she would stop, that she would see how much she was hurting me, that she would choose to be my mother instead of my critic. That hope kept me trapped, because when you're raised by a narcissistic parent, you don't leave, you endure, until endurance turns into exhaustion, until silence becomes survival. I didn't know it yet, but this phase, this quiet erosion of my confidence, was necessary, because it forced me to observe instead of react, to listen instead of defend, to see patterns I'd ignored my entire life. And slowly, without her realizing it, I stopped seeking her approval. I started seeing her behavior clearly, not as honesty, not as concern, but as control. And once you see that truth, everything changes. Once I stopped chasing her approval, something shifted. Not in her, in me. I became quieter, more observant, less reactive, and that's when her behavior escalated. A narcissistic parent doesn't panic when you fail, they panic when you stop feeding them emotionally. She started creating situations where my humiliation could happen naturally. She would invite relatives over without telling me. She would bring up my job loss in conversations that had nothing to do with me. She would sigh dramatically and say, "I worry about her future. She's just so lost." People nodded sympathetically. What they didn't see was the smirk she hid behind concern. This wasn't support, it was performance. The family drama became more sophisticated. She stopped using obvious insults. Instead, she framed everything as worry. "I'm only saying this because I care. You know I love you, right? If you're offended, that says more about you than me." That was the gaslighting. Every time I tried to set a boundary, she twisted it. If I asked her not to share my personal struggles, she called me secretive. If I stayed quiet, she accused me of being rude. If I defended myself, she played the victim. I started questioning my own reactions again. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe this really was normal. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't attack you head-on. It erodes your confidence slowly. The betrayal wasn't one big moment. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Then came the financial help. She offered to manage a small loan for me, said she had experience, said she just wanted to help me get back on my feet. I hesitated, but years of conditioning made me say yes. She began asking questions about my savings, my plans, my deadlines. At first, it felt supportive. Then she started sharing details. Not with me, with others. I found out from an aunt that my mother had told her exactly how much money I had left. I felt exposed, stripped. When I confronted her gently, she laughed. "Oh, please, everyone knows these things," she said. "I'm just being transparent." Transparent. That word echoed in my head. I realized then my vulnerability wasn't private, it was currency. The more I struggled, the more interesting I became to her audience. And that realization hurt more than any insult. Because betrayal from a stranger stings, but betrayal from your own mother rewrites your understanding of love. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every interaction from the past few months, every joke, every concerned comment, and suddenly a pattern emerged. She wasn't trying to help me recover. She was trying to keep me beneath her, because as long as I was struggling, she could stay superior. And that's when I understood something terrifying. My failure wasn't accidental, it was useful. and she was enjoying every second of it. The breaking point didn't come with shouting, it came with laughter. She hosted another small gathering, friends, relatives, people who only knew the version of me she had carefully curated. I stayed in my room first. I told myself I didn't need to be part of it. I told myself distance was enough. Then I heard my name, not spoken, performed. She was telling my story again, this time with details I had never shared with her. My bank balance, my missed interviews, my fears. She even mimicked my voice. The room erupted in laughter. That sound, it cracked something inside me. I stepped into the living room. The conversation stopped. She looked at me, surprised, then amused. "Oh, good," she said lightly. "We were just talking about you." That was it. No denial, no shame, just ownership. I stood there, frozen. Every instinct told me to explode, to scream, to defend myself. But years of emotional training kicked in. I smiled weakly, nodded, excused myself, and walked back to my room. I closed the door, sat on the floor, and finally broke. I cried until my chest hurt. Not loud, dramatic sobs, quiet ones. The kind that come from humiliation so deep it rewires you. That was the moment the truth became undeniable. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't tough love. This was cruelty, delivered with a smile. I saw my mother clearly for the first time, not as a complicated woman, not as someone doing her best, but as a narcissistic parent who fed on control, attention, and superiority. And I realized something else. She didn't see me as her daughter. She saw me as a role. The failure, the cautionary tale, the entertainment. That realization destroyed me and freed me. Because when the illusion dies, so does the hope that kept you trapped. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't announce boundaries. I did something far more dangerous. I went quiet. The next morning, I spoke normally. I thanked her for breakfast. I listened. But inside, something had shifted permanently. I stopped explaining myself, stopped defending my choices, stopped giving her emotional reactions. She noticed. A narcissistic parent always does. She tried to provoke me. Little comments, subtle jabs. I didn't react. And that's when she made her mistake. Because she assumed silence meant surrender. She didn't realize silence was strategy. That breakdown on the floor wasn't weakness. It was the last time I let her see me bleed. And from that moment on, everything I did had one purpose: to reclaim my dignity without ever giving her the satisfaction of knowing. I didn't wake up the next day with a plan. I woke up with clarity. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking why she was like this and started asking how she operated. A narcissistic parent follows patterns: attention, control, image. And once you see the pattern, you can step out of it. I stopped sharing anything personal. No updates about interviews, no financial details, no emotions. When she asked questions, I answered vaguely. "Things are fine. I'm handling it. Nothing new." At first, she seemed pleased. She assumed I was defeated, that the humiliation had finally worked. But then something unexpected happened. I started improving quietly. I took freelance work she didn't know about, saved money in an account she couldn't access, rebuilt my confidence privately. And most importantly, I let her keep talking. Every time she told my story to someone, she exaggerated more. She added drama, invented details, turned my struggle into spectacle. I didn't stop her. I documented everything: dates, who was present, what was said. Not to expose her publicly, not yet, but to understand the scale of the family drama she had created. The more stable I became, the more reckless she got. She began contradicting herself. One day, she said I had no savings left. Another day, she told someone I was living off her generosity. People started noticing, not because I corrected her, but because lies collapse under their own weight. Then came the opportunity. A relative asked me directly, "How are you really doing?" Normally, my mother would answer for me. This time, she wasn't there. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth, calmly, factually. I explained I was working again, that I had plans, that I'd struggled, yes, but I was recovering. The reaction wasn't dramatic. It was worse for her. Confusion. "Wait," they said. "That's not what your mom told us." I shrugged lightly. I'm not sure why she says those things. That sentence was the seed. I repeated that strategy carefully. Never attacking, never defending aggressively, just consistency. Truth doesn't need volume. Slowly, the narrative shifted. People started asking her questions, questions she couldn't answer cleanly. And every time she tried to reclaim control, she overplayed her hand. That's the thing about silent revenge. It lets your enemy reveal themselves. She didn't know I had stopped being the failure she needed, and without that role, she had nothing to perform. Karma didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly, through confusion, distance, and loss of control. The first crack appeared at a family gathering I almost didn't attend. My mother was in her element, holding court, telling stories. But something was different. People weren't laughing the way they used to. They exchanged looks. They asked follow-up questions. "Didn't you say she was completely broke? I thought you mentioned she wasn't working at all." My mother hesitated, just for a second. That second mattered. She recovered quickly, of course, changed the subject, made a joke, but the damage was done. A narcissistic parent survives on credibility. Once it cracks, everything else follows. For the next few weeks, I noticed subtle shifts. People stopped asking her about me. They started asking me directly. She wasn't included in certain conversations, certain updates, and she felt it. She tried harder. The stories became more dramatic, the humiliation attempts more obvious. But exaggeration only highlighted the inconsistency. One afternoon, a family friend pulled me aside. "I don't want to overstep," she said carefully, "but your mom seems to enjoy telling your struggles a bit too much." I didn't smile. I didn't agree enthusiastically. I just nodded. That was all it took. The narrative collapsed under its own weight. The real karma came when her favorite audience disappeared. People stopped reacting, stopped engaging, stopped giving her the attention she craved. Without an audience, there was no show, and suddenly she was left with silence, the same silence she had once weaponized against me. She confronted me one evening, not angrily, anxiously. "You've been distant," she said. "People are acting strange." I looked at her calmly. "I don't know," I replied. "I've just been living my life." No accusation, no revenge speech, just truth. She searched my face for emotion, for guilt, for submission. She found none. That was the moment she realized something irreversible had happened. She had lost control of the story, and without control, she had no power. This wasn't a dramatic fall-down. It was worse. It was irrelevance. She was no longer the narrator, no longer the authority, just another person whose words carried less weight than before. And all of it happened without me ever raising my voice. That's the kind of karma no one applauds out loud, but everyone understands. I wish I could say everything felt better immediately. It didn't. Winning your dignity back doesn't erase years of damage. It just gives you space to finally feel it. Once the family drama quieted down, I was left alone with emotions I had been suppressing for most of my life. Grief, anger, relief. Not because my mother had changed, but because I had. For a long time, I felt guilty, not for what she did, but for not fixing it. That's what growing up with a narcissistic parent teaches you, that their behavior is your responsibility. I had to unlearn that. I learned that love doesn't humiliate you for entertainment, that concern doesn't require an audience, that boundaries aren't punishments, they're protection. I didn't cut her off completely. I didn't make dramatic announcements. I simply redefined access. She no longer knew my struggles in real time. She no longer had material to perform. And without realizing it, she lost interest. That hurt, but it also confirmed the truth. My value to her had always been conditional. Once I stopped providing humiliation, once I stopped participating in the family drama, the relationship naturally changed. I also learned something unexpected about revenge. Real revenge doesn't feel explosive, it feels quiet. It doesn't turn you cruel, it turns you clear. I didn't become bitter, I became selective. I chose who deserved my vulnerability, who earned access to my life, and for the first time I stopped feeling like a failure. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I stopped measuring myself through someone else's broken lens. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life, know this: you don't have to prove your worth to someone who benefits from your doubt. You don't need to confront loudly to reclaim yourself. And you don't owe anyone your pain as entertainment. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is step out of the role they assigned to you and live. Today, my life is quieter. Not perfect, not dramatic, just mine. I still see my mother occasionally. We talk about safe topics, weather, food, neutral things. She no longer tells my story because she doesn't have it anymore. The family drama that once defined me has faded into the background, not because it was resolved, but because I stepped out of it. And that taught me one final lesson. You don't always get closure from the person who hurt you. Sometimes closure is realizing they were never capable of giving it. For years, I believed my failure made me weak, that the humiliation meant I deserved less. But stepping away from a narcissistic parent doesn't make you heartless. It makes you honest. Honest about what love should feel like. Honest about what you will no longer tolerate. This story isn't about destroying someone else's life. It's about refusing to let your own be used as entertainment. The quiet kind of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's self-respect. And if you're still in the middle of something like this, if someone in your life turns your pain into a performance, remember, you don't owe them access, you don't owe them explanations, and you don't owe them your silence forever, only until you're ready. So let me ask you something. If someone close to you kept using your struggles for attention, would you confront them? Or would you do what I did and quietly take your life back?